Let's talk about some of the Algonquin artifacts that we find in Natick and how they shed light on our past life in our area. The most common artifacts we find are made from stone because it is a strong material that is plentiful in our environment and can be shaped or carved into the shape you desire. These stone artifacts we call lithics. Lithics fall into two categories, those that are chipped and those that are ground into the shape you want. Different types of rock respond better to chipping versus grinding, so native peoples had a detailed understanding of geology and where each of these types of rocks might be found in their area. Algonquin people, before the English came, did not have metal to make necessary everyday objects like knives, weapons, cooking pots, or buttons, so they used stone, bone, shell, and clay instead. Many of the tools we're about to look at are similar to objects we still use in our house, garden, and workplaces today. They may look slightly different since they're made of rock instead of metal or plastic. Also, the artifacts we find, which are hundreds and even thousands of years old, are often broken and are missing some parts of the whole object, which are made from less sturdy materials. Let's take a look. Let's take a look at the form of this object so we can infer its function. It's heavy, has an edge or two that has been sharpened, and there's a groove pecked along its midsection. If we imagine that this groove was once an attachment point for a wooden handle coming off of it at a right angle, what does this remind you of? An axe? You're right. Axes were used to chop and split wood just like they are used today. Given that most stone axes are not quite as sharp as metal ones, these tools relied on the heavy weight of their stone heads to provide the force needed to split and chop rather than the sharpness of a blade edge. I think we can all guess pretty quickly what this object might be. It looks pretty similar to something we all have in our houses today. You're right, it's a bowl or a pot. Soapstone, or steatite, is a type of rock that is very soft and incredibly easy to carve into different shapes. It's not a type of rock that can be easily sharpened to a cutting edge, but it has other important properties. Soapstone keeps its temperature really well, so it was placed over the fire to cook in. This vessel is particularly interesting because it has little knobs or handles on both ends. Like many artifacts that we find, this bowl was broken at some point and couldn't be repaired, so it was thrown away and then the other would have had to be made in replacement. Let's take a look at this lithic. It's large, heavy, doesn't have a sharpened point or edges. It has been pecked and shaped so that it has a neck to it. This neck would have allowed something to be attached to it. Any guesses what it was used for? Don't worry, this one's tricky. These artifacts are frequently found at sites near streams and rivers, so archaeologists have been able to infer that these tools are related to fishing. These are called net weights and would have been attached with cord or rope to the ends of large nets that were thrown in the water to trap fish swimming by. Their weight is their most important function, keeping the nets in place and preventing fish from swimming under or around the net. Here are two different sizes and shapes of the same object. Let's take a closer look. I see a curved, scoop-like shape, sort of a flat but not sharp edge at the bottom, well polished on the back like it's been used repeatedly. Does it remind you of anything? Did you say a spoon? That's pretty close in terms of function. Just like a spoon is used to scoop things, this lithic, which we call a gouge, was used to scoop, carve, and shape wood. Gouges are woodworking tools for making a wide variety of wooden objects. The little gouge probably was used for smaller objects or finer detail work. This large gouge is big and heavy and probably was used for heavy-duty projects like carving dugout canoes or shaping fish weir steaks. Okay, let's take a look at these lithics. They've been ground, polished, and sharpened so that their edges are nice and sharp. We use sharp tools for cutting, chopping, slicing, so we know these tools are stone knives. Knives were used for many different activities, including preparing meat and plants for cooking, but also for cutting hides and plant fibers that make clothing, pouches, and baskets, and so much more. Knives come in many sizes depending on their use and are made out of a wide variety of stones that have the right geological properties in order to be sharpened. Not all stones can become sharp when chipped or ground, so it was important to know where these types of rocks occurred naturally in the region. Here's something you might recognize from your house today. It's been pecked and ground into this round, smooth shape with a blunt, short edge. It's heavy and surprisingly smooth on its edges. Since it's not sharp or pointy, we can infer that it wasn't used for cutting, slicing, or piercing anything. It doesn't seem to have a spout where a handle or other object would have been attached either. So what might this sort of object be used for? If you said grinding or pounding, you'd be right. This is a pestle and was used in cooking. Nuts, seeds, and corns would be ground into flour or paste as part of the cooking process. Some families still use mortar and pestles in the kitchen today to make pesto or grind chilies and other spices. These lithics would have been used both on their short end, but also as a grinding stone, sort of like a rolling pin. Archaeologists can tell when these tools have been used for a very long time because their edges are often very, very smooth from. Here are some examples of lithics we call projectile points. A projectile point is a tool with a pointed end and sharpened edges that would have been attached to a wooden shaft and propelled through the air at its target. Can you guess how projectile points were used? If you guess for hunting or as a weapon, you'd be right. These points are the tips of spears and arrows. The spear point is an older technology that has been around for at least 10,000 years. Bow and arrows were invented later, in the woodland period, and were smaller, more accurate, and effective. The shape and styles of projectile points have changed over time, much like the way the shapes of cars or cell phones have changed over recent years. We can use these stylistic changes to tell how old an artifact is and the site from which it came, which is a great help to archaeologists. Can you imagine how the rest of this tool looked when it was attached to a wooden spear or arrow shaft by sinew? Why do you think we don't have those parts of this artifact still? We just looked at 7 very different types of lithics that tell us about a wide variety of activities that took place in the past, including hunting, fishing, cooking and eating, woodworking, and building. If an archaeologist came to your classroom and studied artifacts that you left behind, how many different types of activity would they be able to recreate about your life?